Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics.
This week, Plaid Cymru will hold its annual conference in Llandudno. It has been a very interesting year for the party. Despite coming third in last May's Senedd election, they've seen many of their manifesto pledges become Welsh Government policy through their cooperation agreement with Welsh Labour. As part of that cooperation agreement, two Plaid Cymru MSs have become designated members. Members who, alongside Welsh ministers, will jointly agree matters within scope of the agreement. And one of those designated members, Cefin Campbell, is here with us today. Hello, Cefin.
Hello there.
Thank you for very much for coming on and speaking with us. Before we get into the cooperation agreement, and again with the obvious caveat that it's a very fast-moving political situation at the moment, what has been your assessment of the recent chaos at Westminster?
It's been absolutely dreadful, and I can't remember in my time of being interested in politics that we've seen such chaos in Westminster. And really, it begs the obvious question about how relevant Westminster is to the needs of Wales, because clearly, the needs of the most vulnerable, low-income families in our communities are being completely disregarded. And, I can't understand why more people are now openly questioning, what is Westminster doing for Wales? And surely we can do better than this by having, the fiscal levers in Wales so that we can make our own decisions on, tax and national insurance and benefits and so on, that targets those people who actually need the support more than anyone else. Clearly, when you prioritise bankers and high-level earners, then clearly their priorities are so different to those in Wales.
Where do you think we go from here, Cefin? Do you think it is time for a general election?
Clearly, people have become so disillusioned with the Tory government that clearly we need to change. What the Tory government have done, of course, is to destroy within a matter of weeks their reputation of being, prudent guardians of the public purse. And I fail to see how they will ever recover from that. So we need a conversation about whether we need another general election, but certainly this chaos can't carry on much longer.
Well, I mean, with the polling that's coming out today, some showing that Labour is as much as 36 points ahead in the polls, it feels that if there was a general election, it's likely that Labour would do quite well and probably form the next government. But do you think that a Labour government in Westminster may harm Plaid Cymru's aims? Would a Labour government in Westminster make people feel as though independence was no longer necessary? Or do you think it would maybe provide Plaid with an opportunity to show people that only through independence will they be able to find the solutions that they need?
Well, clearly, whenever a general election comes, we need to get rid of the Tory government. But my question then is whether an incoming Labour government, which would have to look at the needs of the southeast of England, because all public policies over the last, number of generations have been geared towards the economic needs of the southeast of England, particularly the city and London. I mean, all of the parts of the United Kingdom have become subordinate to the needs of southeast England. And I honestly can't see an incoming Labour government doing anything different other than tinkering around the edges. And still, Wales will remain a poor country, as we've been for the best part of 100 years. And what people have to remember is during all of that time, a span of 100 years, the Tories have been in government for over 70 years of those 100 years without a mandate from Wales to govern. We've never voted a Tory government in Wales. When you look at the bigger picture, ultimately, Westminster doesn't work for Wales. And we need to have more of those powers that are at the moment in Westminster transferred to Cardiff and to the Senedd.
You don't share the optimism then of Mark Drakeford, who basically says that all of Wales's current ills will be solved by a Labour government in Westminster.
Well, I mean, I admire his optimism, and of course, as the leader of Labour in Wales, he's got to say that. But what we have to remember as well is that, Labour will be inheriting an almighty, financial mess, which is going to take a long, long time the Tories have led us to this dark hole for such a long time, over the last 12 years. And it's going to take, a long time for us to get out of this mess. And my fear is that, Labour walking into a trap. If they win the next general election, the fiscal situation and the economy in general is not going to be in a good state. And I can't really see Labour doing very much better, to be honest.
Let's go back to what we're meant to do and focus on Wales for a second, Kevin. Well, more than a second, and probably the rest of the interview, to be perfectly honest. Although much has been discussed about the content of the cooperation agreement, not much has been said, I don't think, in the public sphere about how it operates and the designated members' role within that. Would you be able to explain that a bit for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a cooperation agreement, and that contains 46 policy areas. So what Welsh Government and Adam Price agreed on was that we would set up a structure which would allow Plaid Cymru and Welsh Government to work together to deliver on those 46 policy areas. Now, the structure involves two of Plaid Cymru's group members, namely me and Sian Gwenllian, will and have been working closely with Welsh ministers for the last 10 months or so on a number of policy areas. We prioritized, but we're actually, making progress on each and every one of them. So that's how it works, is two of us work closely with Welsh ministers on implementing the 46 policy areas.
Some people have said that the designated members are essentially de facto deputy ministers. How would you think your roles are distinguished from ministers and deputy ministers?
Well, the first thing to emphasize is it's not a coalition. So because it's not a coalition, we haven't got ministerial or deputy ministerial responsibilities. So it's an agreement just on the 46 policy areas, which means that, Plaid Cymru, in effect, is an opposition party for all the policy areas that we disagree on. And there are, quite a number of them around health in particular, and rent freezes and so on and so forth. So we are a vocal, strong opposition for all of the other stuff. But on the 46 policy areas, we are working closely. And I think, Matthew, it's a great example of mature, inclusive and grown-up politics. And, it's something we see across the whole of Europe. It's quite normal for political parties to work together. And, opinion polls in Wales show that people quite like parties working together rather than being in constant confrontation, which is what you get in Westminster. It's the kind of yaboo politics of, the Conservatives versus Labour and so on and so forth. And it doesn't make for good optics in terms of people working together for the common good.
Why then do you think it was that Plaid Cymru decided to go down the route of cooperation rather than coalition?
I don't think a coalition was ever on offer. If you look at the mathematics, Welsh Government needed some stability, but it wasn't something that was crucial to them. So coalition really wasn't on the cards. But having that stability of Plaid Cymru's support for the next 3 years, especially around budgets and so on, and also to ease the path of some of the policy areas Labour were keen to introduce in the cooperation agreement and Plaid's as well. And it makes it easier for those policies to move through the Senedd process.
When this deal was signed, and there were some changes, of course, to how Plaid Cymru members would operate in the Senedd. There were some limitations on questions that could be asked by Adam Price. The number of questions that opposition spokespeople could ask were limited. But there was one thing that was mooted at the time that we haven't really seen anything of, which was the prospect of designated members having to answer questions from members themselves. Can you go through the process of that and what discussions you've had about whether that may actually happen, or whether you think that's not really going to happen now?
Yeah, well, if I can just go back to the first point you made about, yes, things did change because shadow portfolio holders could ask 3 questions to ministers. Now that's been reduced to 2. And also, I used to, and Sian Gwenllian as well, used to sit on committees. So we've had to relinquish our roles on those committees, which means that, colleagues in the Plaid Senedd group have had to take on more responsibility in sitting in our place on those committees. But I think there is a reference somewhere, if my memory serves me well, that the designated members could potentially provide evidence, at least answer questions in some of the committees, should the committees wish us to do that. I don't think there's ever been an agreement that we do that on the floor of the chamber, but maybe on committee level, I think that is where the discussions have been happening, and I'm not quite sure whether that's been resolved in any way.
So obviously you were newly elected in May of last year, had a few months acting as party spokesperson on rural affairs, sitting in committees. How much of a change has it been for you moving from that, what seems to be, for avid Senedd watchers, quite a active role, now to not maybe speaking as much or not being as public facing perhaps as some other MSs would be?
So there are two answers to that good question. So first of all, the learning curve for me when I was first elected was pretty huge. I'd been a cabinet member on Carmarthenshire County Council, so I was quite familiar with, the way that decisions were made, and the collective responsibility and policy areas across the board on local authority level. So I was quite comfortable in that zone. But then elected to the Senedd was a learning curve. But then, having been invited to become a designated member over Christmas, I must say the workload has doubled, if not trebled, to be perfectly honest, because I share roughly 50-50 with Sian Gwenllian, 46 policy areas. So they include sectors as wide-ranging as education, health, social care, agriculture, climate change, housing, Senedd reform, and so on and so forth. So rather than being kind of beginning to develop an expertise on rural affairs, I've now had to overnight become an expert or supposed expert on a whole range of sectors. Now that's meant a lot of reading, reports, background information on policies. I mean, it's been fantastic in terms of my knowledge, improving my knowledge bank, but it's meant a lot of work as well. So that deals with, the first aspect of the question. But then the second one, so I don't get to ask questions or take part in debates that have some link to the cooperation agreement. That was quite clearly an agreement between the two parties. But what I can do is I can take part in debates that are outside of the agreement, and I try to do that, and I try to focus my questions to ministers on matters not relating to the cooperation agreement. But yeah, my hands are tied a little bit, so maybe I don't have as much exposure on the floor of the chamber as I used to, but I like to think that I'm having some influence in other ways.
Absolutely, Cefin. Focusing again on the cooperation agreement, would you consider it a living document? Or of course there was an agreement signed based on certain provisions, things that would be delivered. But do you think it can evolve from what it was initially agreed?
Who knows? It's a 3-year agreement, and people like Adam Price and Mark Drakeford will have to sit down at the end of the 3-year period and decide where we go next. I mean, there are all kinds of options possible. As we stand, the decision is that the agreement comes to an end, and we have a year before the next Senedd elections, and I guess we will be reverting to type. We'll be back attacking the Welsh Government full on because we have an election to win, and we will be trying our best to get as many Plaid Cymru members in, hopefully, the reformed Senedd come 2026. But who knows, we might make a different decision and say, well, let's carry on until that election. But I think it's a model of working together, whether that's a cooperation agreement or whether it's a coalition, whatever the future holds. I think having parties working together makes for better government.
I mean, we've all seen the Welsh Government recently complain about the sort of financial pressures they're under. Do you have any concern that certain provisions of the cooperation agreement may fall by the wayside, given the budget constraints of the Welsh Government?
Well, clearly there'll be massive pressures on expenditure moving forward. I mean, today's announcement by Jeremy Hunt is just going to make things worse. I mean, clearly we're back into the bad old days of austerity. So there will be pressures, but one good thing in a way is that the expenditure around the policy areas have already been earmarked. So they're in place already. And I can't see a situation at the moment anyway where that is going to change at all, because there is a commitment to deliver on these, and obviously, some of them are going to be costly tickets, and they've already been costed anyway. So that shouldn't make a huge difference to the expenditure moving forward.
We've seen recently a number of areas of disagreement between Labour and Plaid, as I'm sure you would expect, but particularly on issues such as rent controls and the eviction moratorium. Obviously, housing does fall within the purview of the cooperation agreement. How does it work when there are issues that you see necessary changes in society that you really want to push for, that are you've already sort of agreed in the cooperation agreement but don't go quite as far as you want? How does that work in that sort of dual partner opposition role?
It makes for interesting dialogue between me and ministers and Sian Gwenllian and ministers, because there are areas within the cooperation agreement that can be open to some kind of different interpretation. And, I think having a robust challenge and scrutiny and line of questioning is good for all governments. And in terms of the housing issue, yes, we fundamentally disagree with Welsh Government on, rent freezes and no evictions policy, because clearly we think that is the right thing to do as we embark on a cost of living crisis. But clearly, Labour have a different view on that. But what is in the cooperation agreement is a commitment to a white paper on property and fair rents. Now, under that white paper, we will be looking at three main principles, which is the right to adequate housing, rent controls, which ties into a rent freeze, and making homes more affordable to people. Now, we've done a lot already on housing, particularly tackling the second homes crisis we have in parts of Wales. And as you know, we are now giving local authorities the right to raise up to 300% premium on second homes. We are now classifying properties in three ways, which is either your main residence, it's either a second home, or it's a holiday let or Airbnb. So it will allow local authorities in future then to license second homes and holiday lets and decide whether that license is applicable or necessary, depending on the percentage of second homes in a given community already. So it gives them more control. So yeah, we've done a lot on housing, and we're looking forward to doing more.
Are there ever moments where Plaid Cymru pushing so hard in areas they feel they're justified to do so causes any friction in the operation of the cooperation agreement?
Maybe friction is too strong a word. As I mentioned earlier on, we're always challenging each other, really. I challenge, Sian Gwenllian challenge, ministers challenge us as well if we have, a different position on some of these policy areas. So I genuinely think that that's good, because it does make your policy more robust, because it's been triangulated and stress tested in different ways. And obviously officials and SPADs play their role in that as well. I suppose, the most challenging one to date is the one around the water resources regulations and the statement that came out last week. Now, I fully understand how difficult this has been for Welsh Government, because they've been quite adamant that they weren't going to change their position on that. But I think what we've done in a sensible, mature and constructive way is to show, using the potential of technology moving forward, how we can be even more precise in what we can envisage being the soil and crop needs of farms across Wales. So what we've managed to do is to persuade Welsh Government to allow, hopefully, if this is what the public consultation will result in, is a licensing scheme which will allow farmers to spread up to 250 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen, which is in slurry or organic manure, in order to buy us time for that 2 years to allow technology to develop, so that we have then precision agriculture taking the place of the regulations around nitrogen loading, which would be far more accurate and far more proportionate.
I mean, the MVZ's issue, obviously, if everyone listening is an avid Senedd watcher, but for those who don't know, there was one of the most interesting political actions of this entire term really was around the Welsh tax bill, nothing necessarily to do with MVZ's, but obviously behind the scenes, lots of negotiations going on with the Welsh Government about the MVZ regulations. What was your assessment of that process and how that political negotiation unfolded?
It was challenging for both Plaid Cymru and Welsh Government, because we started from different positions on that particular issue, but we were in agreement that we would need to deploy some kind of action in a more targeted way. So we put forward a number of propositions, some from government, some from ourselves, and we challenged those, and we decided that some weren't appropriate or suitable. So in the end, we came up with this idea of the licensing scheme. So I think that's where we are. It's gone through a long, arduous, challenging, difficult process for both sides. But I'm hoping we've come to some kind of compromise that is going to be equally as acceptable to the agricultural community as it is to the environment. And clearly, Plaid Cymru is as determined as anyone else to make sure that we, moving forward, do have the environment and the biodiversity element at the forefront of our minds, knowing how incredibly important that is.
Going back a bit to the politics of this all, one of the greatest achievements of the cooperation agreement has been free school meals, universal free school meals for primary school pupils. But Plaid Cymru in the last Senedd pushed Welsh Labour on this numerous times. Welsh Labour actually voted against this policy. Was it 4 times in the last Senedd or something like that? And it's only with the cooperation agreement that they eventually backed this policy. However, as soon as this policy was passed in the Senedd, you saw the Welsh Labour campaign machine kick in and take full credit for the move. Are you ever concerned that Plaid Cymru might lose this comms war, this air war with Welsh Labour, and they end up taking credit for your policies, but doing so on the back of Plaid Cymru votes? My
straight answer to that is that, people who have followed politics know that Welsh Labour voted against this policy 4 times, twice since I was elected. And I fully understand that their defence was that there was no money available. But in the negotiations around the agreement, a compromise was reached that we would find the money from somewhere, and that money has been found. Now, clearly, it's up to the Plaid Cymru comms machine as well, to get the message out there that, this was a Plaid Cymru idea. We put in our manifesto, we put it in front of the Senedd, and Labour voted against it. So, it is our policy, and I'm so glad that it's been implemented. And so far, we've got it up and running for, the younger age groups in primary school. And so far, well, by the end of the first year rollout, there'll be 66,000 extra pupils in Wales receiving free school meals. And for us, the universality, that is every child gets a free school meal, is so important, because we believe that no child should go hungry on any given day. So, it was fundamental for Plaid Cymru to get this policy through. And I know people, I get emails from people saying, well, listen, we earn enough money. Why should I, have free school meals for my children? Well, it's about ridding Wales of that stigma, between the haves and the have-nots, and those on free school meals and those not. I know of people who are in school with me still suffering with that stigma of having had free school meals, which labelled them as being from a poor household at the very early age. And, clearly we need to get rid of that. And I hope this policy is here to stay.
Yes, that old universal truth spoke by Roger Morgan that services reserved for the poor quickly become poor services is something that's echoing through my mind right now. Obviously, the free school meals is one of the big achievements of the cooperation agreement. But what else would you like to talk about from that cooperation agreement that you are most happy to have been delivered?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the tackling the second homes issue and the holiday lets issue as well. So that is to be welcomed in many parts of Wales, where the balance between tourism and local communities hasn't been the right balance. So we hope to address that moving forward to have a more sustainable tourism for Wales. Childcare is another important one in the cost of living crisis. The figure I have here is £100 million has been committed to create 3,000 extra childcare spaces in Wales. That's on top of the 2,500 spaces in the first phase. Now, this will allow parents, mums mainly, to either return to work or to go on to do training, which will improve their skills. So it makes them more employable. This is so important in the current economic climate. So that's something we're really proud of. And that was a Plaid Cymru manifesto pledge, which is now coming into being. The tourism levy has the potential of raising millions of pounds, which can be ploughed back in to make the tourism experience even better for people coming to Wales on holidays, or those visiting Wales as visitors, that is business people maybe coming to Wales to stay. So that's been a key one for us as well. The agriculture bill, we managed to persuade Welsh Government to include food production as an aim and a measurable outcome. Now, that wasn't in the first draft I saw. So that's good for farmers, and hopefully we will have, as that bill progresses through the Senedd, have amendments coming forward around assessing the economic impact of agriculture on our rural communities, and also their contribution to language and culture. So that's another important milestone. And we're also discussing at the moment the Welsh Media Education Bill, which hopefully will go through this Senedd before long, teaching Welsh history in schools and so on and so forth. And another big items for Plaid Cymru.
Are you at all concerned about the response of the tourism industry to the visitor levy and what they perceive to be too large an increase on the occupancy rate of self-catering properties?
I'm an avid supporter of the tourism levy or the visitor levy. It's out for consultation at the moment, and clearly what we're asking people to do is to look at the ways we could raise this levy. It could be a per person, per night levy. It could be per accommodation levy. It could be a percentage of the whole stay, whether you've stayed a weekend or you've stayed for 2 weeks somewhere. It will be a percentage of that overall charge. So we're looking at different permutations at the moment, but it's normal in Europe. 40 countries across the world have some kind of visitor levy, and it ranges in Europe from what equates the euro to sterling between 50 pence a night to £5 a night. Now, even if we were going to go for something in the middle of that, that could raise over 65 million pounds, which is, a huge amount of money we could, reinvest in making tourism better for Wales. Because at the moment, the key issue is that the cost of, upkeeping roads and footpaths and parks and beaches falls on local communities and local taxpayers. So I think the burden should be spread across those, coming into Wales as well.
One of the big topics that was discussed in the cooperation agreement was social care. Would you mind talking a little bit about where we are with proposals to reform our social care system?
Yeah, that again is a big policy area, hugely complex as well. So what we did, we set up an expert panel, and that expert panel has met. I think they started back in March of this year, and they have now finally completed their report, and that report will be made public within the next couple of weeks. And there will be an opportunity for the sector to look at the recommendations and provide feedback to us on what their opinions are. But that's an important piece of work, which looks at some basic principles around providing care free at the point of need, and also looking at ways of integrating social care and health. Which is something, governments have grappled with, including UK government, for a long, long time.
You recently announced also the Arfor 2 programme with Economy Minister Vaughan Geffin. For those who don't know what that is, would you mind explaining it a bit?
Yeah, quite simply, it's £11 million over 3 years, which is to be invested in the 4 local authority areas from Ynys Môn to Gwynedd, Ceredigion and Carmarthenshire, which traditionally have been the identified Welsh-speaking parts or the mainly Welsh-speaking parts of Wales, although we fully understand there are other parts of Wales that are Welsh-speaking as well outside of those local authority areas. But it's to do with giving the economy a boost by supporting young entrepreneurs, supporting current businesses to expand, and using the Welsh language as a national medium of providing services through businesses and through public bodies. So it's making the language relevant to young people and giving them opportunities, if they have great ideas, to invest in those businesses, the ideas they have, and help them stay in the area. Because one of the sad things as someone like me living in rural areas is that we're seeing so many young people leaving these areas to look for work, and it'd be great just to keep more of them here in West Wales and attract those who have left back here as well with their experience and knowledge and skills.
One of the major victories of the cooperation agreement is the agreement between Plaid and Labour on Senedd reform. Is what we've got what Plaid actually wanted?
Well, what we've got goes a long way to what Plaid wanted. We wanted a bigger Senedd because at the moment 60 members aren't fulfilling the function of being a strong scrutiny and challenge well enough. So when you take out ministers and deputy ministers and designated members, there are only a limited number of people left to sit on committees. Now, over the last 20 years, the Senedd, or the Assembly as it was, has had far more powers, but the number of members hasn't increased. So in order for that scrutiny to be as effective as possible, we need more people in there. So we've got an agreement around 96 members. I suppose, where Welsh Government and Plaid have had to, in a way, compromise is around the voting system, where Plaid wanted STV, the single transferable vote system, whereas we've now got a compromise around the DeHont system. Now, the Anoraks listening will want to, look up DeHont as a system. It's too complicated for me to explain in a few minutes, but
Have a very Anaraki audience, Kevin. I wouldn't worry. They'll know.
Well, they can Google it. It's based on, I think he was a Belgian parliamentarian, if I remember. So he devised this system. So yeah, the Anaraks can have a look at that later on.
One of the major criticisms of all politics, really, is that people feel remote and far away from decisions being made. You obviously represent a huge geographical area that isn't actually that close to Cardiff in many ways. Do you think this Senedd reform will actually bring people closer to their representatives and to the decisions that are being made that affect them?
Well, I think the discussions at the moment are basing the new boundaries on the proposed UK Westminster boundaries that are going to change. And I think we're waiting any day now for news on the new boundaries. So if we base the next Senedd elections on the new Westminster boundaries, it will make the representatives, the Senedd members, far closer in geographical terms to their electorate. I mean, I must be perfectly honest, it doesn't make sense that I represent an area that is about 3/4 of the land mass of Wales. Getting around from one part of that region to another can take me up to about 3.25 hours. You know, I'm not going to get anywhere soon, really, if I have to travel from where I live just outside Llandeilo in Carmarthenshire to the Llŷn Peninsula. But you know, this is where we are. It doesn't make sense. So hopefully we can have smaller boundaries, more members, making them more accountable, and, you know, making them easier for the electorate to access.
I was going to say, nightmare for the diary keepers of politicians in Mid and West Wales trying to not organise a meeting in Pembroke Dock at 1 and Llangurig at 2.
Absolutely.
Kevin, thank you so much for coming on. We've got one more question before you go. And as it is the week of Plaid Conference, we should ask, what do you think the future holds for Plaid Cymru? Do you think you are heading towards government in the next election? Well,
what we will do is try our damnedest to get as many Plaid Cymru members in there after 2026, because, you know, what we've seen over the last month, what we've seen, the turmoil of the Boris Johnson government, the austerity for 10 years before that Westminster just isn't working for Wales. And I just want more people to see that we can do things better by having those powers ourselves. I mean, we saw during COVID, you know, how people related to decisions made by Welsh Government because they knew that they had the Welsh people at heart. They were giving priority to the people of Wales. And clearly, Westminster is not doing that. We are not important to them. So we've got to have more of those powers, you know, devolve to Cardiff and devolve to local authorities even more, so that people feel that they can influence the way forward for Wales. And you know, I think more and more people are coming round to the idea now that independence for Wales has to be a better future for us.
Cefin Campbell, diolch yn fawr iawn am siarad gyda ni.
Croeso, diolch yn fawr.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard this evening, please don't forget to find us on Twitter and Facebook at HereI'vePod, or go to our website, www.walespolitics.com. Thank you for listening to Here I've. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.